Hello friends, and welcome to this third video in my series on the digital trap. And there will be a fourth episode which will be dealing with this list, which is sort of an analysis and talking points, what happened over the last 40 years, what works, what doesn't, influences, things that matter, then things that don't matter, things you might have not considered about digital signals, and so on. But that will be a rational thing. And of course this series has a bit more has had a story form, a bit of history. And what you see in front of me is also history, because we got one player from the 1980s, one from the 1990s, one from the 2000s, and then we got some far more modern DACs here, a DAC kit. And we'll be talking about it, and I'll compare these a little bit with each other, and I will also sort of say which one is the most closest to vinyl. And I'll go into some of the modding that I did and what I found out on the basis of that. So that's what is in this video. I hope you found this interesting, and thank you for tuning in to this third episode. So let's get into it. Let's just get here first with what we have here. So here we got a Sony, I think, I'm not sure exactly, but I would say mid 80s, maybe a bit toward the end of the 80s. I would guess 87. It's the Sony 222ESD. It has a Philips TDA1541 DAC chip in it, which is a 16-bit PCM chip. And it's the non-A version. And here we got the Marantz CD48. It had the Philips TDA1541, which is a bitstream chip, but like the very recent ASS chip, it isn't not a 1-bit chip. It's actually a 5-bit chip for the large signals, and then the small stuff it does with a 1-bit, creating the noise. That is not necessarily to deter the signal, because it doesn't have the resolution of a 16-bit DAC. So it needs to make up with it by quickly switching things on and off. So that's the early bitstream with the 5-bit DAC. And then we got another bitstream here from the 2000s. That's the Arcam CD 73. It has a Wolfson 8741 chip in it, which is a 24-bit high sample rate chip, and that one of course is a bit interesting, because yes, you can use those extra bits because you do oversampling, but of course your source is only 16-bit, and you can't get more bits from 16-bit. It is 16 bits. That's information theorem. We got 16 bits, and you can lose them in digital filters and remove them, but you can never add them. So, but nonetheless, that is a highly detailed DAC. It brings out a lot of detail. However, as you later find out, it's actually not my favorite in stock form. It can be modified. Some people have reported really good results, but so far, not too impressed with it. And then we got some more modern DACs here. This is a very cheap one. This is an SMSL Sanskrit 10 DAC. Very popular. Has the same DAC actually in it as what you saw in episode 2 with my RME ADI-2 DAC, FS DAC. You know, quite an same chip, but that of course that RME DAC had was $1,600 Australian, or 1,000 euros, 1,000 US dollars around so. So very different implementation. However, there is some things that are of course the same, which is the DAC chip, not the implementation. And there we got the Schiit Bifrost 2, which is a multi-bit DAC, so that's PCM. It uses a analog devices 18-bit converter that is actually a special version for audio, but it has very high accuracy, half. So its linearity is on a half LSB, so the smallest bit in the signal, and half of that is actually accuracy. Same as, by the way, this TDA 1541, which had a similar very high accuracy spec for its day. That took a long time before this accuracy was actually matched. So that's what we got. Oh, and here we got a Cirrus Logic CS4398. The transformer needs to be hooked up to the power, and then to some leads come in here, and then we've got a DAC. So and if you improve the quality of the components, this thing can be can yield very good results, and then you need to put a better output stage on it as well, because it has some op-amps in here that are not ideal. But what do you expect? I mean, this is $40–50 Australian to get this kit here, X transformer. So anyway, so we got representatives of 40 years of digital audio here. Maybe not the top models, but also not the bottom of the rank. None of these were the cheapest in their class, except perhaps that. That is probably one of the cheapest implementations of that AK chip that is in there. That's the 4399, I think, but I could be wrong. Now, so as to the question of which of these CD players actually sound the most like vinyl. So, well, I've done extensive listening. By the way, sorry, before I get into that, there's another CD player coming with a Luxman with a very rare PCM1701 chip in it, and I want to hear what that is about as well. However, the one of these CD players that sounds the most like vinyl is the Marantz. So that's the CD48. I've actually since modified it. I'll talk about it a bit more, but this one sounds just when you first glance listen to it, sounds the most like vinyl, far more than any of these others here. And however, there is some distinct differences with vinyl. Yes, at the same time it sounds like vinyl. What I found especially remarkable about this CD player is that its vocal range was very gripping, like it drew attention to itself. Very very realistic mid-range. However, if you moved up in the spectrum, absolutely not. Sounds this, and down the spectrum quite reasonable. Still very good, but could be a lot better as well. And the other thing that it seriously lacks is the amount of nuance and detail higher up, and just finer things. So where an analog system can, and especially combined with my directly heated tube amplifier, with vinyl you can have this endless depth and nuance which doesn't seem to have grain to it or anything like that. It is like like an infinite depth, and here it just struggles. It seems to struggle with the detail and with the finer nuance. So, and now I've tried to resolve that with this thing. And so the first thing that I did, and at the start it also had a bit of a mechanical quality, but I've been able to remove that. So what I've done is I've tried three things. So this DAC that is in here has a specific feature, is that it actually has a voltage out, not an I out. So where it is current out, it has a voltage out because it is a built-in op-amp. And we'll talk about it here as well. One of the things, the progression of chips, has that more and more functions have been incorporated. So you had a single chip solution, and which allowed, it had two advantages. A, it allowed cheap players, didn't cost much to produce, and you could still sell them for a lot. And then number two is that the designers that would be implementing these chips couldn't screw it up as much, because they just needed less to do. So the digital filter was built in, the op-amp was built in. So if that was done decently, the designer of the CD player couldn't screw it up and actually choose the wrong op-amp, which would muck up the sound, or with certain combinations of equipment would destroy the sound. So now, given that I had that feature, of course, I could try to remove the op-amps out of this and move to a capacitor coupled output. And then later on, I moved to a transformer coupled output, and I also made a mono output from that, because My system is mono, so but what that taught me is, when I removed the op amps, a lot of the mechanical sound, that quality of, I don't know how it's called, with grain and mechanical type of nature, became a lot more fluid and analog, so it moved towards the vinyl sound a lot. And I think really good op amps probably do the same thing. But so even with moving to a capacitor, that disappeared. So that was the first time when I got really in touch with what the op amp sound is, and it's so pervasive you might not actually even hear it until you hear a whole chain without op amps in it. Yes, there's still the op amp in the chip, but of course that was made hopefully with some intelligent design, and I think it was, that gives the DAC its own characteristic. But anyway, removing the extra op amps that were used to drive the headphone and the RCA output made a whole lot of difference, especially then when I moved to the transformer. And now having heard these three output configurations, I could also see what the sound of the DAC chip itself was. Now, things that I haven't tried is yet improving the return loops. So you always have power. That needs to be very low ripple in order for digital to not lose resolution. It's actually highly critical, far more than analog audio, because any disturbance there, even including the currents that go back into the ground plane and returning to the power source, because there's always a loop. Wherever there's something voltage, there must be some kind of current. And so in the ground plane you might get very small variations in voltage, noise, other things, fluctuations that influence it. So by separating the chip and the analog parts and making sure they're not influenced by digital switching inside the CD player, you can further improve the sound. Some would even argue that is of crucial importance to the overall quality, which I haven't tried, but I'm already getting to grips what the sound of this is. So, conclusion: sounds a lot like vinyl in its current setup, especially with this analog out. But of all these, it is absolutely not my favorite player. If you would ask myself, or you get these questions, your wife says, you can only keep one. Or your desert island, although I think on a desert island you need food, not a CD player. But if you only could pick one, which one would you like to be locked up with? And now the question with that is, the answer to that question is actually this player, the oldest of the bunch. Yeah, even the RME DAC, which was seriously, for me, I think it's a pretty good price point. It's not an $8,000, it's not a $30,000 DAC. Nor is it an $800 US DAC like that, but this one is absolutely my favorite, and it only cost me $120 US or 200 Australian, 120 euros to buy. Absolutely my favorite. Does it sound like vinyl? No, it doesn't. These two doesn't sound alike at all. Does it retrieve as much detail as that player does? No, it doesn't. However, it has an addictive quality to it, and it's also immensely vigorous and dynamic, but not unrealistic. So the contrast ratio, how the music is presented, what I find is that a lot of digital has a emphasis on the foreground and smaller details seem to drop away. So you get this uneven balance that just at all doesn't sound like anything that you would hear in real life. However, with this, the presentation seems, while not really natural, or not absolutely not like vinyl, it seems consistent with itself. It is very enjoyable, and it's ultra dynamic, as you would sort of expect from a digital medium. And there's another thing on a very different basis, and that's the capability of this player, despite its limitations. I'll get into that. the capability of this player to share mood changes. So when I hear singers, and some of this was also on this one with Eva Cassidy, and when she sings and there is an inflection in the song where halfway a word, sung word, the tone changes, the emotional baggage, you know, you go from happy to sad, or an ending, and the emotion in the lyrics changes, and the singing, and there's just this change of feel brought into the music. This player is the only one out of this whole set that carries that emotion and transfers it to you. With this one, I don't hear it at all. Yes, it's there. I can hear every word, everything that, you know, is being sung or played, although it does lose detail, which I, by the way, think is a lot of all the Delta Sigma converters until very recently had that problem. Maybe until this generation, they lost a lot of detail. And still, by the way, when I moved from my RME to my Bifrost, I was just astounded that it was like a veil actually was lifted when I went to the Bifrost 2. But with this one, that change in emotion and so on is really, you just feel it. It is there, and it's strange because these vocals, like I said, are very gripping, but yet that part, it doesn't transfer. So, and now would you say, oh, this is typically what you know, pulse code modulation, PCM type chips do? Well, that is a PCM, but it doesn't do that. It's very revealing. It's can also be quite rigorous, like it has a, you know, a decent slam in the bass and that sort of thing. Like, but a bit of that exaggeration. Where this is just an allure. This is just addictive to listen to. It's its own thing. Yeah, but that emotional aspect is something that you wouldn't. I didn't expect that with a player that is this vigorous and this dynamic. But here it is. So this is 1986 technology, and it would be, or you know, something like that. The chip was, I think, fabricated between 1985 and 1989. Absolute gorgeous player for not much money. So that's quite astounding. And speaking of which, and rounding this story off, really, it's like that is the digital trap. We think we had 40 years of progress, and at the end, to me, at this stage, even unmodified, because this still has op-amps in it, I can hear them, and I think if I would put a tube output stage on this, this would massively improve. And that's before we get into other tricks with, because I think the power supply and the way the digital filter is, there's even a 2 kilobyte buffer in it, so maybe these guys even implemented an elastic buffer in the signal to reduce jitter. I couldn't really understand the schematics of the service manual, but I saw it in there, the 2 kilobyte RAM. So perhaps this was actually a very well implemented player for its time. And yeah, not surpassed by anything I've got here. That is not to say it's without its fault, but there you go. And also, I must say, for those who have watched the first episode, the Philips CD880 definitely has a lot of familiarities with this, but the CD880 was far more nuanced and not as explosive as this one can be, and expressive. But it shares a lot of the traits, like it really threw me back. It's probably very comparable. But as you can see, one of the things that I also learned from all this, that implementation matters. This is definitely not implemented the same as the Philips CD880. Uses almost the same chip. There is some difference between the A and the non-A version. And of course the Philips uses a high-grade selection of the A version, the single crown. But yeah, these are the DACs. With this my favorite, and that the most vinyl sounding. And you know, that is not what you probably would expect from you know, specs and higher res formats, or having higher res available to you, like 24 bits, high sampling rates. This can do DSD, that probably too. Yet this is the player that beats them at the moment, and I'm still will be modifying it. As said, I'll be soon receiving another player, a Luxman DZ112, and with a very rare chip. And now part of the other thing that is in the future, I'm gonna further mod these players, and I'm probably will try to build 2 other DACs. So one based on a PCM56, and I will use shitload of DACs. You know, that is the technical expression when you implement parallel DACs. So I will be doing that. I will also be building an hopefully get my hands on an ADI-1865 or a 62, because that is one of the chips that I haven't really that's wanna listen to from Analog Devices and see what that's about. Audio Note uses that chip to today, and they say it's the only option, or about so. So I want to implement those. I want to apply tube building techniques to the power supply and see what is really possible. And because as I understand it from people that have really elaborate DACs, such as for example Lou Reeder, who sometimes comments on my videos, he has implemented a super discrete DAC in 10 boxes. It's all about the power supply, high quality components, and he says it really approaches the best of vinyl very closely. It's nearly the same, and that's sort of what I'm getting from people that I trust to have similar ears to what I have. They say that when you really do this well, it gets close to vinyl. Probably not surpassing it, but it gets very close. So and that's just CD format. We're not talking high res, which doesn't add all that much. A very well implemented 16-bit is probably, but we'll, you know, I'll get into that in the technical video. Anyway, this is the conclusion. So you now know what will be coming up, what I'll be trying, some of the things that you can experience with it, and also a short history of 40 years of digital audio in this form here, and some of the differences. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and have a brilliant day. I hope to catch you in the next video, and until then, take care. Bye bye.